Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Game Changer. I'm Maryam Zia. In today's program, we will be exploring Pakistan's relations with South Africa. Pakistan and South Africa share a multifaceted relationship that encompasses economic and diplomatic relations. In today's program, we will be exploring that how Pakistan's Engage Africa policy has influenced and impacted Pakistan's relations with South Africa and what are the opportunities for the future. When we look at the history, Pakistan and South Africa both share a common history, both have been colonies and both have some common issues and problems like poverty and inequality. Pakistan and South Africa established their diplomatic relations in 1994, and in today's program we will be looking at how Pakistan's relations with South Africa have evolved over time. To discuss this and more, I'm joined in the studios by Mr. Sheharyar Khan, who is expert foreign affairs. Thank you for joining in today's program. With him, I'm joined by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who is expert in international relations. Thank you for joining in today's program. And we are joined online by Dr. Hasnain, Javed, who is economist and IR expert. A very warm welcome to you all for joining in today's program. So, Dr. Jaspal, let me start with you. When we look at Pakistan's relations with South Africa, how do you see the history of these relations between the two countries, and what are some of the key milestones of these relations between the two countries?
If we go into the historical background, we can trace that the resistance in the colonies against the, you can say, British colonies, one of the, you can say, freedom fighter of South Asia, I mean Mahatma Gandhi, he was in Africa where he started protest and then he returned. But then we find that during the apartheid regime, Pakistan did not establish these relations which we call it diplomatic relations with South Africa. But from 94, we find that we have an embassy there and they have their embassy here, and we have a cordial. As you very rightly pointed out in your intro, that we have a common colonial heritage. So English speaking and English culture or British culture, British influences that also assist us in dealing with each other. But the most important thing is that when we were young, we used to see the South African cricket team. Cricket is very attractive, and here we had a sort of thing. But there's a volumes of the trade. But in this context, raw material, especially the agriculture products of Pakistan, very acceptable, or that is a big market in South Africa.
Right. Dr. Jaspal, we will be discussing the economic relations later in the program, but I'm interested to know about the history. How Pakistan supported the apartheid movement, anti-apartheid movement and racial discrimination in South Africa, and how when this was, how when the diplomatic ties were finally established in 1994, how they have evolved.
I can add here that from 1947 till 1994, Pakistan had a good relations with British. We were a member of the Commonwealth. Of course, after 1977 we exited, but at the same time, we did not accept our previous colonial masters' dictates, and we didn't recognize the apartheid regime in South Africa. So this was a very firm principled stance. It means that from the very beginning, Pakistan had been supporting the right of self-determination in South Africa and the majority right rather than the minority domination, or you can say capturing or colonization. So this was a very firm stance. Second, if you see that Pakistanis have been always appreciated the efforts of the Nelson Mandela.
Indeed.
And he was very welcomed whenever he was here, and even today we give, of course he is an icon, but that was also sort of thing. Then we find that South Africa, from the very beginning, it was a good market for us and good attractive place, but if we were not establishing a diplomatic relation, it means that we were committed with the South Africans, and that is now having a good impact with our current relationships.
So, Mr. Sheharyar, when we talk about these bilateral relations, how do you see that the current political and economic situations or the environment in both Pakistan and South Africa have influenced their bilateral relations?
So, Maryam, thank you so much for inviting me. When it comes to South Africa, we have to know that it is one of the largest countries, the biggest countries in terms of economies when we look at Southern Africa. Other than that, it is also a member of the G20, and it's also a member of the BRICS nations. And historically, during the apartheid regime, Pakistan was one of the leading countries that basically opposed and vehemently basically opposed the apartheid regime in South Africa. Nelson Mandela, he was also a Nobel Peace Laureate, is considered one of the heroes of Pakistan. And in 1993, he visited Pakistan. And we remember that it was a very emotional moment for Pakistanis, and Pakistanis really supported his struggle for the freedom of South Africa. And that freedom was attained in 1994. During that time, Pakistan supported the anti-apartheid movement. And I also remember in Pakistanis passports at that time, it was clearly written that this passport is valid in all the countries of the world except apartheid South Africa. So that's how much Pakistan basically supported the anti-apartheid movement.
And anti-racial movement. So Dr. Hasnain, when we talk about this bilateral relations between the two countries, how do you see the diplomatic ties between the two countries have evolved over time?
See, the South Africa is the country which is very less talked in Pakistan. We must have to talk and explore the South African politics, bilateral relationship, multilateral relationship, and we must know it is I mean, easiest access from America to the East Asia and the Southeast Asia. So this is what it is. But South Africa and the Pakistan have engaged in a high-level diplomatic exchange. Actually, in 2021, the two countries signed an MOU on political consultation, which aimed to enhance bilateral cooperation on a political, economic, and socio-economic issues. South African, I'm quoting this from the South African Department of International Relations Corporation. Then is the Pakistan has expressed support for the South Africa's bid for permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council, Pakistan Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But there are so many major disagreements also weighed in these areas, like Pakistan's support for the self determination of the people of Kashmir. Has been source of the disagreement between the two countries. South Africa has maintained a position of neutrality on Kashmir issue. Of course, there are few I mean, diplomatic backs which was creating the problematic factor. Well, in 2017, Pakistan recalled its High Commission to the South Africa overall in aligned with the incident of assault on Pakistan. And then is the incident was resolved through the diplomatic channel, Pakistan Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then is in 2022, the Revenue Department of South Africa has initiated a probe against the Pakistani embassy in connection with the selling vehicle. Well, like Pakistan deployed in South Africa were changed with the selling vehicle by importing in South Africa, and then is a both South Africa and Pakistan impose a ban on the registration and the transfer of the vehicle on embassies. These are a few disturbed areas which I just wanted to, I mean, just pointing out,
Of course,
as
these
I'm
are
not talking
some
about
of the bottlenecks or
exactly on the
challenges that
economic
both
relations.
countries faced in their relations. But like you earlier
Just the
mentioned, that
diplomatic
Pakistan
problems.
supported South Africa's bid for UN Security UN Security Council's permanent seat. What are some of the other issues in which both countries have supported each other on international
See, I mean,
forums or for regional issues?
so there are so many issues. Like for example, there are a gap between the G to G issues. I mean, we have not been called South Africa, and we never been focused on South Africa much in the different areas like bilateral relationship, multilateral relationship. Of course, we have to have the cultural exchange programs between the South Africa. There is a university in the South, Stellenbosch University, and I got that my I mean, the second PhD is from China. The first PhD is from the Stellenbosch, South Africa, in Cape Town, and that was, of course, I mean, one of the our panelists. Honorable Jaspal Sab is just mentioned. Of course, we cannot let it go like a long walk to freedom. Of course, and the great Nelson Mandela. So there are so many other things, but South Africa is located at the southern tip of the subcontinent of Africa. So we must need to understand that to retain its status as a gateway of African subcontinent and possess a well-established route to America. So Europe
Right.
and increasingly in Asia. So we are very much careless in the economic ties and bilateral ties, cultural ties, and the political ties. So this is why we are
There's a huge
this is
potential.
how
There's a
and
huge
why we are
potential, of
sitting in
course.
this program. Yes, of course, but
Of course,
it's
there's a
yet
huge
not
potential.
been
So, Dr.
discovered.
Jaspal, when we talk about the political relations between the two countries, how do you see these relations evolving over time, and what is the current situation?
I think that Pakistan and South Africa's political relations are on positive trajectory. We supported each other. For instance, Pakistan is very much supportive to this expansion of the United Nations security, I mean permanent members, but with the regional approach. And in that context, we have some convergence of the idea. We didn't support any single country because the Americans have been, or the American-led world has been supporting the India, but here we said the regional where we have convergence. Then we had say the political sort of thing that in South Africa we have a democratic political system, and here we have a convergence of these kind of things. We have a parliamentary or the sort of thing. Similarly, on a number of the issues, especially safety and security of the nuclear material or civilian programs, there we supported. No, South Africa is the only country in the world which had a nuclear weapons program, and in 1993 it dismantled 6 nuclear devices and joined the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Pakistan welcomed it. And Pakistan is very much supportive to South Africa's commitment with the NPT, despite this that we are a nuclear weapon state. Then we find that there is a African, the most important thing is that why we are looking. If you see in the African continent or in the among the African nations, Pakistan has not more than 4 diplomatic missions, I mean ambassadorial missions, and in that context of South Africa is one of that. It means that we have a political convergence is so long. That's why we establish a diplomatic. Then
Right, but of course.
finally, we will look about the South Africa in this context. Of course, Pakistan has a more acceptability in the MENA, Middle East and North Africa, but if it is South Africa, it's one of the biggest country and its neighborhood is very attractive. And if Pakistan, Shahzad was just in the break was mentioning the Pakistan's Look Africa policy and Ministry of Commerce. In that context, of course, South Africa makes a lot of significance in our politico-economic calculations.
Right, but when we look at some of the regional initiatives like African Union, how do you see Pakistan has supported this, and how this has ultimately influenced the bilateral relations between the two countries?
So Pakistan is, in fact, if you see all these African Union or all these unions, they are organizations for catering the interest of the African nations, and in that preserving their sovereignty. And these unions were basically how to maintain, whether they are successful or not, it's a debatable, but these unions' primary perspective is, or objective is, that the external or out of the region interference must be minimized. In this context, of course, Pakistan is very much supportive, and Pakistan itself believes in regionalism, because regions, if there is a lesser conflicts in the regions, there are more opportunities for prosperities within the region. It will be, and in this context, of course, the African unions or the African nations, or in that context, we always are supportive to it. There is another important thing is that Pakistan is an important state in the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese, and Chinese major focus is Africa, or what call it West Asia. And in this context, Pakistan is a linchpin in that if you see that from Kashgar, going West China, going towards the MENA and then the South Africa, that is a Gwadar is the linchpin. So in this context, Pakistan always supportive or will Pakistan desires that the regional organizations or regional unification must prosper because it creates an opportunity for the other states.
Right. Right, but Mr. Sheharyar, when we talk about these issues, what are some of the key challenges talking about Pakistan and South Africa? Like I earlier mentioned that there are some common issues both countries have been facing and a shared history as well. So what are some of the common challenges, and how can both countries work together to deal with these issues?
So as Dr. Hasnain mentioned, there were like some bilateral diplomatic issues that were like resolved through diplomatic channels, and now Pakistan and South Africa enjoy a very good relationship. The only area where I basically see that a lot more needs to be done is between enhancing the trade between South Africa and Pakistan. So in that regards, the Ministry of Commerce launched the Look Africa policy. This was launched in 2017.
Yes.
And that policy basically looked at all of the regional blocks that are present there in Africa. So the bloc that comprises of South Africa is basically called the Southern African Customs Union. So that is the bloc where Pakistan is focusing, and South Africa is one of the leading countries in that. So the Look Africa policy basically prioritized 10 countries in Africa, and these 10 countries basically comprise of 78% of the total GDP of Africa, and South Africa is one of those countries. Then there's Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, there's also Senegal. Other than that, there's like Kenya, Tanzania. So all of these countries are on the priority list of Pakistan. And before this Look Africa policy was launched, Pakistan had only 14 missions in the total of 54 African states. And after the launch of this policy...
So what was the reason for these low number of missions? Do you think that Pakistan's foreign policy was mainly focused on capturing the attention or capturing the markets of major powers, and Pakistan wasn't looking towards African region or these far states, and now there is a shift that we are witnessing in Pakistan's foreign policy as well?
There's definitely a shift. So historically, Pakistan has basically exported. One of the major export partners of Pakistan has been the US. And other than that, after Pakistan attained the GSP plus status, European Union has been the second largest partner of Pakistan's exports. Since Pakistan is like now feeling that there's like a lot of competition, and to expand into new frontiers and new markets, this new policy was launched. And when it comes to Pakistani products, finished products, I'm not talking about raw materials that generally, historically, Pakistan has been.
Because that was a major.
So the market for finished goods of Pakistan are there in Africa. And as we also know, as Dr. Jaspal also mentioned, that after the Belt and Road Initiative was launched and Pakistan became a very vital part using the CPEC network. So with China's presence and China's infrastructure development in East Africa and South Africa, Pakistan views Africa as a leading market for its exports for various commodities.
Right. We will be talking more about these areas and avenues and exploring more about them, but we come back. We are talking about Pakistan's relations with South Africa. Dr. Hasnain, when we talk about Pakistan's economic ties with South Africa, Pakistan-South Africa Joint Commission was established. Let's talk about this commission. What are some of the key objectives of this commission, and what it has achieved so far?
See, if I talk about that commission, which yet not been, pertinent to the point, because there are few challenges which is about South Africa, because I'm always telling about the South Africa, which is untapped area for the Pakistan, and Pakistan must have to work harder, and our foreign office must have to have the close ties with South Africa, because for the imports and exports. And you in the later part, I'll talk about the coal, cement, and other things. And but there are so many issues. But this commission can work on what the major. If I talk about the major challenges, which is about the skill shortage, decline global competitiveness in fighting among the South African ruling party, and the volatility of the domestic currency. But if I talk clearly about the South African part of trade, like Pakistan export to South Africa was about 222 million, which is very much less. And according to the United Nations Commerce and Trade database on the international trade, so bilateral trade between the South Africa and Pakistan was valued at approximate 6.7 billion in 2020. So Department of Trade Industry says this. Well, South Africa export to Pakistan
So
were
why the
valued
huge
at
gap, Dr.
4.6
Hasnain? Why
billion.
there is such a huge gap when we see there is a lot of potential? What has been some of the challenges that has, that has been caused these bottlenecks for low trade volume between the two countries?
Yes, political uncertainty and our Ministry of Industry, Commerce and Board of the Investment. I always talk about, but Foreign Office is not listening to me, but they are not connecting to each other. They are not sitting together because they are not exploring the things between the trade. So as I'm telling you that there is a lot more potential about the export. If I talk about the Pakistan, exported products, which is about the slag, ash, fruit, nuts, and so many other things. But if I talk about just about the African countries, export, which is about the 20.10% in 2022 and 23 compared to the same period of the financial. So Kenya remained the largest export destination in Africa for Pakistan during the followed by the Africa and Egypt. But there are a few issues which I wanted to, pointing out that anti-dumping duty on the cement export from Pakistan need to be removed. One. So South Africa slapped anti-dumping duties in range of 14 to 77% on cement import from Pakistan, effective from the December 18th. It is about the 2015. This has resulted in Pakistan export of Portland cement, which what we call it HS 25399. So the South Africa falling from 80.95 million in 2014 to just 4.2 million. Then is a boiled, what we call it, parboiled rice should be prioritized from export to South Africa. And South Africa import of rice are dominated by parboiled rice through Pakistan export. And Pakistan rice exporters need to understand the demand of the South Africa market and come up with a strategy to promote the rice to the South Africa. But
Right.
the Ministry of Industries again, Board of Investment again, and the Foreign Ministry, they have not visited any of the conference, and they have not arranged any of the trade settlement between the two countries. There are a lot many things about which I wanted to talk about in the later part, which is our pharma product to the South Africa. A commission must need to
Right.
understand this. Then is a potential export of electric span to the South Africa, and then is a hedging payment a risk, and the time and effort needs to invested in the identify large reliable import in Africa. So there are number of trade union must need to understand, and in the later part I'll talk about there are many issues to understand what Africa has facing and what Pakistan has facing.
Right, there is a lot of potential. So let's, Dr. Jaspal, when we talk about these issues that Dr. Hasnain has been pointing out, how does a free trade agreement between the two countries has impacted or positively influenced these issues?
I think that this kind of the agreement facilitate the trade and communication with the people. And Hasnain was very rightly pointing out that there are many, you can say, obstacles. In this, in 21st century, we need to come over the obstacles to increase the trade volume between two countries, or when we start focusing like South Africa and Pakistan. But the challenges are higher, and these are challenges because of the our what we call it our bureaucratic hurdles. People have a less awareness. We are shy to take initiative. We are our decision making process in these areas is very much a victim of inertia. So that's why we are always trying to, you can say, step by step move, but not taking a risk. For example, he didn't highlight, but at the background of his mind, definitely this fear is that the India and South Africa are now constituting a bigger trade agreement, facilitating each other. That would be going to erase the space which we have there in the shape of the rice products, in the shape of the other agricultural or small surgical instruments or these kind of the thing. Definitely when you have to, we are competing in the with the others.
So what can Pakistan do to promote trade and investment
Pakistan
opportunities?
has to look at the diplomatic level at recently in March. I mean that in this last month, today is April, Pakistan, I came across at the Foreign Services Academy, there was a South African diplomat was invited from South Africa because they launched African nations course at the Foreign Services Academy that was to familiarize them here, and he was here doing his course. And when we discussed with him, and he wrote me later on that he's interested to do a PhD from Pakistani University because that gave him an idea of the regional outlook. Similar kind of the approaches we must adopt it. That
Pakistan does offer a scholarship program for the African
they have it, but in this Foreign Services Academy that was a fully funded scholarship. And then recently one of ours, you can say for a diplomat when he was in the in South Africa doing his diplomatic assignment, Arshad Abbasi, he did a PhD from there. So I think that if you have to broaden the scope of your relationship, you have to go for a people-to-people contact, but in all domain, and that is the education is one of that domain, and that I think Foreign Services Academy is doing a good job that when they invite their diplomats, train their, show them the Pakistan, because that diplomat told me that
we need to diversify our options.
But similarly, second point here is the Ministry of Trade and Commerce. They have to, you can say, African designated, what we call it, expos. And we can go to our people go and you can say show our expos there that what we can do and what they can do. But at the same time, again, I go back what Ala was pointing out, that if you are not addressing these preferential trade agreements or these kind of
free trade agreements,
not adopting a facilitating policy at the government level, then such trade will go from a third party that is not in the benefit of Pakistani traders.
That is not for the benefit of Pakistani traders. But Mr. Sheharyar, how can both countries leverage their strengths for greater economic cooperation?
So there can be an analysis on certain areas where South Africa is importing a lot. So one criticism that comes from the Ministry of Commerce is that Pakistan doesn't have very high tariffs historically when Pakistan imports a lot. Obviously that policy is now changing because of the economic outlook of Pakistan. But South Africa in return has high tariffs, and South Africa closely monitors what is being imported into their economy. One analysis also shows that when it comes to pharmaceutical industries, South Africa has zero tariffs and they basically import pharmaceuticals from all across the world. So that is like one area where Pakistan can tap into that market. Other than that, coal imports. So Pakistan imports, even in like 2019-20, Pakistan imported over $1 billion worth of coal from South Africa. And obviously that is like needed for power production. A lot of like production facilities, energy generation facilities in Pakistan are coal powered. So that coal is like coming from South Africa. So that's like one area. A lot of like one area that has like been totally neglected is the cooperation between Kruger National Park, one of the largest national parks in South Africa. They have like a very historical cooperation agreement when it comes to Pakistan's wetlands and Pakistan's conservation of the wetlands in Karachi and the Indus Delta that like flows into the Indian Ocean. So that like historical connection and that cooperation needs to expand as well. And as Dr. Jaspal was also mentioning, that not just looking at South Africa, but looking at Africa on the whole, there needs to be a lot of like cultural exchange and a lot of like areas where African languages and African culture can be propagated and taught in Pakistan as well.
So do you think that when we talk about this Engage Africa or Look Africa policy has impacted positively these relations between the two countries or for African continent for that matter?
So because of the Engage Africa policy, Pakistan's Ministry of Commerce and Trade, they established a 100 million rupee fund for Africa. So using that fund, Pakistan has conducted a lot of trade fairs in across various countries in East and like South Africa as well. So these trade agreements and also liberalizing the visa regime between Pakistan and Africa, various African countries, because as we also know, there are a lot of like East African countries basically provide visa on arrival facilities to Pakistan. So Pakistan also needs to like basically make Pakistan's visa regime more liberal, so businessmen from various African countries, especially South Africa, can come to Pakistan and like start developing these business-to-business contacts that are much needed. Other than that, when it comes to promoting languages, other than the Foreign Services Academy, as Dr. Jaspal has mentioned, Namal University can also take the leading role in initiating some African studies languages courses and cultural courses as well.
To enhance these people-to-people contacts. But Dr. Hasnain, let's talk about strategic and security ties between Pakistan and South Africa. What is the current state of these ties between the two countries, and what are some of the key areas of cooperation?
See, there are a lot many. First, Sheharyar has, clearly pointing out these problem and challenging points that as we are importing much of the coal, there are a lot many areas and there are a lot many issues to be, maintained and to clear out. As there are they have the zero, exchange rates in the pharma and other things. But as far as we are talking about the defense ties, of course, the South Africa and Pakistan have signed several memoranda of understanding to enhance the defense cooperation in the South Africa as the South Africa Department of Defense and Military Veterans. So Pakistan has been significant customer of South African arms manufacturer and the Daniel being a major supplier of the artillery system and the mutation of the Pakistan military. So we have the good ties, but again, I'm talking about a few very important hurdles that still we are not exchanging any military programs with South Africa, as that most of the European ties, most of the Bosnia is permanent member of the South Africa. So there are, I know that, and everybody knows that there is a political uncertainty in South Africa, and as well we have. So, but if there is a problem, if there is a challenges, and there must be the gap. So there is a much problem there. If there is a much problematic areas, so there is a gap for the most improved area. So we need to talk about
what needs to be done to enhance these ties, Dr. Hasnain? What needs to be done?
Most formally, the Foreign Office must have to have a one window operation for Look of Africa strategy from 2017. It is just in millions and they are not working as they should be. And frankly, I'm talking about that they must have to have a trade relationship as well as a defense ties, because for the artillery and other things, South Africa can give us the most potential things. And if I talk about just the medicinal things or the other things, they have the big vacuum over there. So we need to understand that the four areas, the Ministry of Industries, Board of Investment, Board of Investment, yet not release any of the kind or the trading policies for the South Africa, especially South Africa. And of course, there is a 40 plus countries there in the whole of the Africa, but still we are not conducing much of their but skill trade relationship, exchange program, education exchange program, and most importantly, as you talk about the defense ties, of course we have to talk about the defense ties more oftenly, because India is much covering this area with the South Africa. So why not Pakistan? Pakistan has completely ignored the South Africa potential. So we need to come up with the best of the best potential ties with the South Africa. And if you give me,
so Dr. Jaspal, how can Pakistan and South Africa work together to promote regional peace and security, like you earlier mentioned as well, and Dr. Hasnain is also highlighting that India is tapping that potential. What needs to be done that we can promote these ties further?
I think that we have to focus on the socio-political economic ties rather than on the linking that whether we minus India or not. We must come out of we must come out of this fear of India, but of course we may remain vigilant, as I was pointing out earlier, that there are many agreements with the other countries are doing with the South Africa. If we are targeting for our economic opportunities South Africa as a market, then we have to also finalize similar kind of the agreements, and we must be proactive in this kind of a thing. Second point is that this Africa is the future, though the if it is with the
continent of the century.
It's a big entire African continent, and within that South Africa is an important country because technologically and educationally it's a developed country. But if you have to focus on the Africa and look Africa, and then you have to go for a state-specific policies, then we have to be more prepared that in this context we develop our more understanding, cultural understanding, or these kind of the things with them, and increase our educational and technological linkages. If you see in this context, we are importing coal, and for our Port-Qasim and these you can say Sahiwal. In that context, we are also importing metal from them, but we have to reciprocate in a trade, because otherwise it will be big burden on us. So these are the how we can facilitate. And finally, I can submit. Unfortunately, Pakistanis get a market. In the world, we have a market, like South Africa is one of those markets for our economic products or surplus production dumping. But at the same time, we are failing to add the value in our products. That's why our businessman is not, you can say, getting much advantage. And our trade volume is always in favor of South Africa versus Pakistan, if you see it. So I think that we have to now start working over it, how we can increase the quality. As in the beginning of your question, you refer to India. If we have to compete with India in South Africa particular, or in the African entire continent, on the African continent, then we have to add a quality in our products rather than just rhetoric in our products.
Right, quality in our products is essential, but connectivity is also important, Mr. Sheharyar, when we talk about Look Africa policy. So how do you see what could be or what is South Africa's interest in China-Pakistan economic corridor, especially if we relate it to South Africa's own geopolitical interests in the region?
So when we look at South Africa and Africa on a whole, we have to see that Africa on a whole is a flag bearer when it comes to anti-colonial struggles, anti-imperial struggles, and it's basically a role model of the freedom struggles from across the world, anti-slavery as well. So now that Africa is expanding, and African countries, most of them are moving from low income to middle income countries, they would also want to expand into developed economies. So one of the areas which is the strength of South Africa and other African nations is the raw materials, lithium and coal, and Africa on a whole is like a hotbed of minerals and all sorts of natural resources.
And strategically important minerals, of course.
Strategically very important. In terms of national security, very important, and lithium has been categorized as, and a lot of superpowers are fighting over, resources when it comes to lithium. So through this Belt and Road Initiative that you mentioned, South Africa, being at the tip of the whole continent, has that opportunity to connect itself through its ports to, again, Gwadar port, and get very easy access to Central Asian republics, to China especially, because otherwise if it takes the regular route, it will probably take months for South African ships to basically even reach the eastern side of China. So the Gwadar port basically provides a very short access for these products, for this raw material, for these minerals that are very in demand in China. That is one of the reasons why China
and access to Central Asian states.
Central Asia as well. So that is one of the reasons why China is investing so heavily in infrastructure, roads, mines in Africa, is to get access to those resources.
Right.
And Pakistan is at a unique position to provide that gateway to the rising economy that China is, and that opportunity can be realized through the BRI network.
Right. So, Dr. Hasnain, how do you think South Africa's interest and investments in CPAC might influence the bilateral relations between the two countries, and what would be its impact on the economy of the both countries?
Right. Look, under the Look Africa policy, we must have to understand that the Pakistan have 9 economic zones. So first, under construction project, which is Rashakai Special Economic Zone, Dhabaji Special Economic Zone, Allama Iqbal Industrial City, Bustan Special Economic Zone, and then is in a pipeline project which is about the ICT model industrial zone, industrial park on Pakistan steel mill land, Mirpur Industrial Zone, Mohammed Marble City, and Mokpanda Special Economic Zone. So these are the economic zone, and we can just figure out five potential areas, which is about. I just want to elaborate all these areas which are the special areas like paper and board. If I talk about the trade potential, there is a 74 million of the trade potential primarily on the paper and the paper board area, and the primary competitor are Brazil, India, and Turkey. We must not have to give them a space to work in these areas. So potential challenges could be the premature paper industry, low scale forestations, share declined, which was being declined in 2016 and 17, and then there is a less market activity. Then is a instrument and appliance used in the medical, which has the trade potential of 333 million. If I talk about the semi-holy milled rice, which has the trade potential of the 448 million, and the primary competitor for these is the Thailand and India. Again, India. We must not have to give the space between all these areas. The edge of the Pakistan is the production increase, new hybrid seed available, guard research, 2 million ton more rice would be available in the next 3 years. And the biggest challenge for Pakistan in this area is relatively large. Irregular area in the India e-selling method. So we have to transform our e-selling method. Then is a man and the boy's trouser, bed and brace. So this area is the potential trade of the 198 million of the USD, and the primary competitor again is the China, India, and the Mauritius. And then the challenges to the Pakistan is the China and the Mauritius capture major market share. With the Mauritius face the 0% tariff. So Pakistan must have to work, and our foreign office and the Ministry of Industry must have to focus on the zero tariff space over there. And the last point, and there is a medicinal areas which has the potential of the 71 million. So major competitor areas, the India and the China. So again, there is a low unit volume, so we can work a lot much about the South African trade services. So these are the specific area along with the special economic zone under the BRI project, which is called the Gwadar, and there are the special economic 9 economic zone, which is just 4 areas are being covered and 5 are just pending. So we have the specific area, we have the special pharmaceutical areas, which is the Dhabaji, Rashaki, and we can offer very informative areas and specifically segmented and fragmented areas
of course.
within these potentials.
Of course. So, Dr. Jaspal, what do you think? What are some of the current opportunities and future prospects for enhancing and strengthening Pakistan-South Africa relations?
I think that the current opportunity is that we start tapping the South African market by our agricultural products, like the rice is very attractive for them, and in that context, that is one way of looking. Second is that Pakistani government has to adopt a long-term policy and make the Pakistan as a fruit basket for the South Africa, because the South Africa is a very big desert, and they need it. And third is, in this context, of course, our cement industry. In South Africa, there was time that we were doing a good business, but then they put some tariff, and due to that, it declined. So we have to focus on that how we can get rid of that tariff so that our cement industry will be benefit and boost on it. So these are a few areas where if we can go for a focused arrangement and policy approach, then we have a more opportunity. Finally, in this context, as we are talking about that, BRI is one of the you can say factor in this emerging geopolitical world, or it's a big game changer. And our CPEC is a flagship project of the BRI. And from there, we can also use this, how the Chinese are going, and we make it more facilitate this road pipeline network towards the Africa, and from the Gwadar moving towards that. If you see, the Chinese have a great interest in this. They have started building their base, or it's almost built at Djibouti, and similarly in the other part of there. So we try to see how much we have opportunities for investment as a third party in certain projects.
Right, right. So, Mr. Sheharyar, what are some of innovative practices or the technologies that both countries can learn from each other to strengthen in some of the key sectors that we haven't focused so far?
So when it comes to port management, obviously South Africa has like a competitive edge, because that like they've been like using those ports since a very long time. That's like, I basically see the future of any connections that need to be conducted between all African nations, East Africa, if you take a look at South Africa. So there needs to be more connections when it comes to establishing these future economic zones through Gwadar, and connecting them to the port in Djibouti, then connecting them to the port in Mombasa, and then to South Africa as well. So right now we have to like work on these connectivities. Other than that, I was also like noticing that in the last 15 years, no Pakistani head of state has even visited South Africa, which is very unfortunate. In the very recent history, the only time I remember was in 2013, when Mr. President Mandela passed away. At that time, Pakistan's president, he basically visited his funeral. So that basically goes to show that South Africa never has been in a priority list of Pakistan to like develop these trade ties, and that needs to change now.
There are a lot of MOUs between the two countries. So what needs to be done to implement those MOUs to enhance and strengthen these relations between the two countries? Like people-to-people contact is one of them. What are some of the other avenues?
Very basic steps need to be taken. The preferential trade agreement is not in place right now. That is one of the reasons why Pakistani products are facing such high barriers of entry into the South African market. So if that like understanding can be developed and these preferential trade agreements can be signed, then we can like talk about tariffs, then we can talk about like customs duties, and then talk about like all of these products that Pakistan used to export in bulk quantities in South Africa, that can be continued. And then again, future prospect of South Africa using the BRI network, that conversation needs to happen as well, and I personally think there's a lot of potential there.
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sheharyar Khan, for joining in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Zafar, Nawaz, Jaspal, for joining in today's program. Thank you very much, Dr. Hasnain, Javed, for joining in today's program. In today's program, we talked about Pakistan's relations with South Africa. Of course, when we look towards Africa, there is a lot of potential, and Pakistan needs to expand its economic and diplomatic footprints towards Africa and South Africa as well. That's all from Game Changer tonight. Take care. Allah Hafiz.